The capture of a Commando, September 12, 1942, Sicily. Captain Richard Dick Carr of the Special Boat Section hit the rocky shore at 03:47 hours, his body jarred by the impact. He was 40 meters adrift from the planned landing zone. Behind him, the grinding tear of rubber against stone signaled the demise of their boat, fatally punctured by submerged rocks that intelligence photos had never shown. Icy Mediterranean water flooded his boots, a cold shock that travelled up his legs. He scrambled upright, clutching his Sten gun, relieved to find it dry. 3 other commandos, their faces blackened with camouflage grease, splashed through the surf beside him, their expressions grim as they turned their gaze toward the coastal railway line they had come to destroy. The mission brief had been deceptively simple: demolish the critical rail junction at Catania to delay German reinforcements moving south, then extract by submarine at the first light of dawn. Carr had executed similar operations twice before, in the rugged terrains of Crete and the desolate sands of Libya. He understood the unique rhythm of sabotage raids, the silent, tense approach, the practiced efficiency of placing charges, the narrow window between initiation and detonation, and the desperate, lung-searing sprint back to the extraction point while the timer on the explosives ticked down behind you like the devil's own pocket watch. They moved inland, pushing through a hostile landscape of spiny cactus and gnarled scrub olive trees. Navigation was a matter of compass and the pale, ethereal glow of moonlight. Ahead, the railway embankment rose from the earth, a dark scar on the land, precisely where the maps had promised. Carr held up a hand, signalling a halt. No guards were visible, no sounds carried on the night air. It was far too quiet. A knot of unease tightened in his stomach. He gestured for his men to spread out, to approach the target from different angles to mitigate risk. Carr covered the last 30 meters on his belly, the rough ground scraping his uniform. The air was thick with the familiar smell of creosote and diesel, the universal perfume of railways from the white cliffs of Dover to the dusty streets of Damascus. He was carefully placing the first plastic explosive charge against the steel rail junction when the world erupted in light and noise. Searchlights slammed on from 3 directions, pinning them in merciless white beams. Italian voices barked sharp, panicked commands. A moment later, a machine gun opened up, its fire ripping through the cactus plants with a sound like tearing canvas. Carr instinctively rolled behind the meager cover of the embankment, bringing his Sten gun up to return fire in a short, controlled burst. In the strobing chaos, he saw one of his men pitch forward and go down, a still, dark shape on the ground. Another commando, thinking fast, sprinted for the relative darkness of a distant olive grove and vanished. The third, caught dead in the intersecting glare, slowly raised his hands in surrender, his face a mask of illuminated shock. Carr ran. He broke cover and sprinted away from the tracks, his heart hammering against his ribs as bullets snapped past his head closer than angry wasps. He was a trained endurance runner, but he only made it 200 meters across open ground before something hard and unyielding, a rifle butt, smashed into the base of his spine. A bolt of white-hot agony shot through him, and his legs ceased to function. He dropped to the ground, the impact driving the air from his lungs. Rough hands dragged him up. An Italian officer, a young man no older than 25 with feverish eyes, pressed the cold muzzle of a pistol against Carr's temple. He screamed questions in heavily accented, broken English. "Where is the submarine? How many men are you? What are the targets?" Carr offered only what the Geneva Convention demanded: name, rank, and serial number. Nothing more. The officer's frustration boiled over. He struck Carr viciously across the mouth with the heavy pistol. Blood, warm and tasting of copper, filled Carr's mouth. More soldiers arrived, a ring of 8 or 9 men, their rifles all pointed at his chest. They bound his wrists behind him with a coarse rope that immediately began to cut into his skin. Someone kicked his legs out from under him, and he fell face first into the dirt. Through a haze of pain, he watched them discover his demolition charges. They handled the explosives with a mixture of fear and triumph, carefully defusing them before piling them on the railway track like grotesque trophies of their victory. Dawn arrived, painting the sky in shades of pink and cold, indifferent grey. They marched him to a truck, his boots crunching on the gravel path. The other captured commando was already in the truck bed, his face a swollen, discoloured mess, one eye completely shut. Neither man spoke. There was nothing to say. The guards shoved them against the cold metal sides and climbed in, settling with rifles across their laps and cigarettes dangling casually from their lips. They were young men, conscripts probably, farm boys from Calabria or Campania, who had likely joined up for the promise of steady pay and a uniform, only to find themselves guarding captured British saboteurs in the pale light of a Sicilian morning. The truck rumbled for 6 hours into the island's interior. They drove through rolling hills draped in vineyards, past ancient stone villages where laundry hung like prayer flags between windows. Weather-beaten peasants in the fields would stop their work, leaning on their tools, to stare silently at the British prisoners. Throughout the journey, Carr's training took over. He methodically counted guard posts, noted military installations, and memorized any detail that could be useful if he ever got out. The guards offered no water. By noon, his tongue felt thick and foreign in his mouth, and his lips were cracked and bleeding. The searing pain from the rope around his wrists had long since subsided into a dull, worrying numbness. They arrived at Gabini airfield at 1400 hours. The place was a monument to destruction. Bombed-out hangars gaped like hollow skulls. The runways were pocked with craters, and the wreckage of 3 German fighters was pushed unceremoniously to one side. An Italian major, a man whose uniform was too clean for his surroundings, interrogated them in a maintenance shed that reeked of aviation fuel and stale sweat. He spoke perfect upper-class English, claiming to have studied at Cambridge before the war. He cycled through a practiced routine, offering cigarettes, water, and sympathy. He told them the war was nearly over, that their cause was lost, that resistance was pointless. Cooperation, he promised, would lead to better treatment. Carr, his voice hoarse, repeated only his name, rank, and serial number. The major's mask of courtesy evaporated in an instant. His eyes hardened. He barked an order, and guards dragged both commandos outside, forcing them to stand at attention in the punishing glare of the September sun. For 3 hours they stood without water, their bodies screaming for relief. Carr's legs began to shake uncontrollably. Sweat soaked through his uniform, plastering it to his skin. Through it all, he watched German aircraft land and take off, meticulously counting them, memorizing their squadron markings, knowing full well this vital intelligence would likely die with him. At dusk, they were loaded onto another truck. This one travelled south through the night, crawling along narrow mountain roads without headlights. The darkness outside the truck was absolute. One wrong turn meant a 1,000-foot drop into a black ravine. The guards were tense, their eyes constantly scanning the sky for the telltale silhouettes of Allied bombers. One of them, a devout Catholic, crossed himself every time the truck's tires screeched around a hairpin turn. Carr managed to sleep in fragmented 20-minute intervals, chin on his chest, only to be violently awakened when the truck hit a pothole, slamming his skull against the truck's metal bed. September 14, 1942. The truck finally stopped outside a medieval fortress perched impossibly on a limestone cliff, high above the town of Enna, Castello di Lombardia. An officer announced its name with a sort of grim pride. Built by Normans in the 11th century, modified by Spanish occupiers in the 16th, it had been repurposed by Mussolini's regime as Campo Prigionieri di Guerra 49, a high-security prison camp designated for captured Allied special forces. The walls were 15 feet thick, solid stone. The main gate was ancient oak reinforced with heavy iron bands. Guard towers at each corner commanded a sweeping, unassailable view of the entire valley below. They marched Carr through the gate into a central courtyard that felt untouched by the passage of 800 years. The flagstones were worn smooth and concave by centuries of marching boots. A well stood in the centre, long dry, its mouth covered by a heavy iron grate. Around the perimeter, stone buildings stared back with windows like narrow arrow slits. The air was heavy and trapped a thick, layered stench of mildew, human waste and despair. An Italian captain processed them with cold, bureaucratic precision. Name, rank, serial number were painstakingly recorded in a massive ledger. All personal effects were confiscated: watches, pocket knives, even their bootlaces and belts. With a small knife, a guard methodically tore Carr's commando flashes from his uniform, severing the last link to his former life. The captain spoke in clipped Italian to a brutish sergeant, who then stripped both prisoners naked. He inspected every cavity with rough, probing fingers, discovering and confiscating the small compass Carr had managed to conceal in his rectum. They were forced to stand naked and shivering in the courtyard while guards laughed and made lewd comments they didn't need to understand. Their new uniforms consisted of filthy brown trousers and grey shirts with PG, Prigioniero di Guerra, stenciled crudely across the back in white paint. Instead of boots, they were issued rope sandals that would shred a man's feet within a week. They were marched to Cell Block 3, a converted medieval storage chamber with damp, weeping walls and a floor of packed earth. It was a space meant for 20, now crammed with 43 men. They were British, Australian, New Zealander, commandos, paratroopers, and men from the long-range desert group. All were men who had failed missions, survived ambushes, or been captured after their aircraft went down. A grizzled South African sergeant named Piet van der Merwe, lying on his straw pallet with his eyes fixed on the stone ceiling, laid out the rules of their new existence. His voice was low and gravelly, devoid of emotion. Roll call at 0600 and 1800 hours. Missing it meant 2 days in the punishment cell. Speaking during roll call was 1 day. Failing to salute an Italian officer, another day. The punishment cell, he explained, was a medieval cistern beneath the fortress, a cylindrical pit 8 feet deep and 3 feet wide. The stone walls were covered in slick green slime. There was no light, and you stood in putrid water up to your knees. They lowered your meagre food rations on a rope. Food, such as it was, came twice daily. Breakfast was a watery soup with unidentifiable bits of rotten vegetables floating in a film of grease. Dinner was 200 grams of hard, stale bread, sometimes with weevils, sometimes without. Meat appeared once a week, if one could call it that. Horse meat, most likely. Dog, possibly. Van der Merwe mentioned that a man had died just last month from dysentery, his body simply emptying itself onto the packed earth floor until there was nothing left. The latrine was a simple hole in the corner of the courtyard, covered by a wooden box with a crude hole cut in the top. There was no privacy, no paper. The stench was a constant presence, wafting into Cell Block 3 whenever the wind shifted. Guards emptied it once a week, a task they delegated by forcing prisoners to haul buckets of raw excrement down the cliff face and dump them in a ravine below. The detail was reserved as punishment for any infraction, real or imagined. Through careful observation and whispered intelligence from other long-term prisoners, Carr began to map the fortress in his mind. The castello had 3 main levels: the courtyard level where the prisoners were held, an upper level where the Italian guards and officers were quartered, and a lower level of medieval storage chambers and dungeons, now used for solitary confinement. The walls were solid limestone, in many places carved directly from the cliff itself. Some sections were original Norman construction, others were Spanish renovations from the 1500s. All of it appeared impenetrable. The Italian guards were mostly older men, veterans of the First World War, or middle-aged reservists called up for drab garrison duty. They were not sadistic by nature, just profoundly indifferent. They enforced the rules mechanically, beating prisoners who resisted with practiced weariness and ignoring the rest. Their commander was Colonel Antonio Battaglia, a career officer who had fought in Ethiopia and Albania. He visited the prison twice a week, always impeccably uniformed and always accompanied by a German liaison officer from the SS whose cold blue eyes watched everything and everyone. That German presence changed the entire atmosphere of the camp. The Italians might be bribed with cigarettes or a photograph of a pretty girl. The Germans were a different breed, calculating, suspicious, and ruthlessly efficient. They were here because Campo 49 held special prisoners, men trained in sabotage and demolition, men who might possess critical intelligence about future Allied invasion plans. The Germans wanted that intelligence, and they had their own methods for extracting it. On his first night in the Castello, Carr lay on a straw pallet that rustled with lice and stared up at the vaulted stone ceiling 15 feet above. The blocks were fitted together with a precision that 800 years of earthquakes and warfare had failed to loosen. Around him, a symphony of misery played in the dark. The breathing, coughing, and low whispering of 42 other men. He heard someone praying softly in Polish. Somewhere to his left, a man wept silently, his shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. Van der Merwe's matter-of-fact voice cut through the darkness, a low murmur intended only for the new arrivals. He explained what everyone needed to know. The Germans were constructing something important in the valley below the fortress. Prisoners on work details had seen trucks arriving with heavy equipment, Italian labourers pouring concrete foundations, and German technicians erecting massive antenna towers. Whatever it was, a radar installation, a communications centre, it was important enough that the Germans had assigned their own security liaison to the fortress to prevent escapes and ensure that no intelligence reached Allied hands. 3 men had tried to escape since the camp opened in July. The stories were now camp legend, cautionary tales told in hushed tones. One had made it over the wall using knotted blankets but fell 60 feet onto the rocks below. They found him the next morning, still alive, both legs shattered. The Italians shot him where he lay. The second had tried to bribe a guard. The guard took the bribe and then promptly reported him. He received 14 days in the punishment cell. The third, bold and desperate, had simply walked out the front gate in a stolen uniform during a chaotic shift change. He made it 12 kilometers before Carabinieri caught him on the road to Catania. He was returned to the camp with 3 broken ribs and no front teeth. Escape from Castello di Lombardia was considered impossible. The walls were too high, the guards too numerous, the local town fiercely loyal to Mussolini. Allied lines were 200 kilometers away, across a brutal mountain range patrolled by German units. Even if you got out of the fortress, even if you made it past the town, you would die of exposure or starvation, or you would be shot by a German patrol long before reaching friendly territory. Carr lay awake, his body aching, and examined the impossibility of it all from every conceivable angle. He had been trained for this, mentally prepared for the reality of capture and internment, taught specific techniques for maintaining morale and planning escape. He recalled the first rule drilled into him by his instructors: never stop looking for the weakness. Every prison has one. Every guard eventually makes a mistake. Every system, no matter how perfect, has cracks. He fell asleep counting the massive stones in the ceiling above him. Somewhere in the ancient bones of this 800-year-old fortress, there was a way out. He would find it. Chapter 2. Hell in Gavi Fortress. The iron gates of Castello di Gavi slammed shut behind Pat Dooley on December 3, 1942, sealing him inside what the Italians boasted was their most escape-proof prisoner of war camp. The medieval fortress, perched on a rocky outcrop, had held political prisoners since Napoleon and now housed British commandos, officers deemed too dangerous for ordinary camps. The stone walls rose 60 feet thick in places. Guard towers commanded every approach, and no prisoner had ever escaped. The guards shoved Dooley into a vaulted chamber where 32 men lived in conditions designed for 12. Wooden bunks lined the walls 3 high, the stone floor glistened with damp, and a single iron stove sat cold in the corner, unlit despite the December chill seeping through ancient arrow slits. "Welcome to the Bloody Ritz," a voice called from the shadows. "Find a bunk before evening roll call, and stay away from the Italian officers. They're looking for any excuse." Morning roll call came at 6 sharp, the guards hammering rifle butts against the chamber door. In the inner courtyard, December wind knifed through Dooley's thin uniform as Italian officers counted heads with deliberate slowness. Capitano Mordini, the camp commandant, inspected the ranks like livestock. He stopped before a prisoner swaying from hunger. "You dare to move during roll call?" The man tried to respond, but Mordini's swagger stick cracked across his face. The prisoner dropped. Guards hauled him to the punishment cells in the fortress's medieval dungeons. The remaining men stood frozen for another 40 minutes until Mordini dismissed them, Dooley's fingers numb from the cold. After a breakfast of watery soup and mouldy bread, a work detail marched down the winding path from the fortress. Their task was loading stones for military construction, hauling rocks that tore their hands, and opened wounds that never healed in the damp air. But Dooley noticed something the guards thought unimportant. Every day, the work detail passed a drainage outlet built into the hillside where water from the castle's ancient sewer system emerged. The guards never gave it a second glance. The outlet was barely 18 inches across, clogged with centuries of filth, ending somewhere deep inside the fortress's foundation. A man would have to be insane to consider it. By the 3rd week, Dooley had lost 15 pounds. His commando training had prepared him for hardship, but the grinding monotony of starvation was its own kind of warfare. The daily ration, perhaps 800 calories, left men obsessed. Conversations that started about escape plans spiraled back to remembered meals. Some men traded bread for cigarettes or hoarded crumbs in tins. Dooley shared his bunk section with 3 officers. Captain Jack Pringle, a tank commander captured at Tobruk, had been inside Gavi for 18 months. Conserving every calorie, he spent nights sketching the castle's layout, mapping guard rotations and blind spots from memory. "The Italians think these walls make this place escape-proof," Pringle whispered one evening. "But every fortress has a weakness. You just have to find it before the place kills you." Lieutenant Tony Davies, a commando with shrapnel in his leg from a raid on Rhodes, occupied the bunk above Dooley. The damp made his wounds ache, but Davies possessed a critical skill. Before the war, he was a civil engineer who maintained London's sewer systems. "I know filth," Davies said matter-of-factly. "Sewers, drains, the underground. Most men can't stomach it, but if you can swallow your disgust, sewers go places." The 3rd man was Major James Rickett, a paratrooper captured in Sicily. He spoke fluent Italian, learned from his grandmother, and picked up crucial information by listening to guards who assumed no prisoner understood them. "Mordini's getting transferred in March," Rickett whispered one February evening. "The guards are already talking about his replacement. Means the camp routines might shift. Changes create opportunities." But February brought death. A prisoner named Harrison collapsed during evening roll call. The guards left him in the courtyard for an hour as punishment. By the time they dragged him to the infirmary, he was gone, finished by pneumonia and starvation. They dumped his body in the valley, marking him as a deserter. Standing in formation the next morning, Dooley felt something break inside him. It wasn't hope, but the illusion that survival meant simply enduring. Men were dying or breaking mentally. The fortress was designed not just to hold prisoners, but to crush them slowly under the weight of stone, routine, and despair. That night, he replayed every detail of the drainage outlet. The opening was about 40 feet below the castle's foundation. Water trickled out constantly, meaning the system was active. The smell was of organic waste from the castle's latrines. Crucially, the work detail passed it during shift changes when distracted guards performed head counts. In early March, Dooley watched the guards change patrol patterns for Mordini's departure ceremony. For nearly an hour, attention focused on the main gate. The work detail stood idle, guards distracted. Dooley stared at the drainage outlet 15 feet away. Water dark as oil seeped from the opening. The smell of human waste, rotting food, and 8 centuries of filth reached him. Every instinct recoiled, but then he remembered Harrison's body being dragged away. The drain was 18 inches across. A man would have to strip down and cover himself in filth to slide through. The tunnel would be pitch black, possibly too narrow, possibly flooded. There was no way to know where it led. The Italians had never guarded it because no rational man would consider it an escape route. But Dooley had been trained for what others considered impossible. British commandos specialized in infiltration through sewers and drainage systems, operations requiring the suppression of human revulsion. He had crawled through filth in training, but tried to recall anything worse and came up empty. That evening, back in the vaulted chamber, Dooley pulled Pringle, Davies and Rickett into their corner. He kept his voice to a whisper. "That drainage outlet on the work detail path, where does it go?" Davies went still. "You're serious? Where does it go?" "Into the foundation somewhere. Medieval fortresses built waste systems into the original construction. It probably connects to the latrines and kitchen drains, feeding up through the lower levels." Davies paused. "Could also narrow to 6 inches, could flood, could collapse on you in the dark." "But it's a way in," Dooley said. Pringle leaned forward, his skeletal frame casting shadows. "In where? We're already inside the bloody fortress." "We're in the cells," Dooley said. "But the fortress has other sections, storage, guard quarters, offices, with unbarred windows and doors to the outside walls. The Italians guard every door and gate they know about, but they don't guard what they think is impassable." Rickett shook his head. "Covered in shit, crawling blind through a medieval sewer, hoping it leads somewhere useful and doesn't just kill you in the dark. That's your plan?" "That's the beginning of a plan." Davies reached under his bunk and pulled out a stub of pencil and a scrap of paper. He began sketching. "If the outlet is at that elevation, and the foundation is 40 feet higher, the main drain runs at an upward angle. Medieval engineers knew gravity. They would have positioned the outlet at the lowest point. The main vertical shaft would be near the center of the fortress, with lateral pipes branching to different buildings." "How wide?" Dooley asked. "Main drain? Maybe 2 feet. The branches could be anything. Depends on how old or well maintained it is. They needed waste systems that worked." Pringle pulled out his own sketches. "The administrative section is in the western wing. The windows there aren't barred. The Italians don't expect prisoners to reach them. If you could get into that section, you'd have access to the external wall with a 60-foot drop on the other side." "Better than these walls," Dooley said. "Depends on whether you survive the sewer first." Over the next week, Dooley studied the drainage outlet. He noted the water flow, the angle, the stone construction. He observed the guards' routines, calculating distances and risk. Harrison's death had shown him one path: slow deterioration. But the outlet showed him another. It was filthy, dangerous, possibly suicidal. The Italians didn't guard it because they couldn't imagine anyone desperate or insane enough to attempt it. Desperation was just another word for motivation. Sanity was a luxury for men watching their friends die in a place that had never let anyone escape. On a morning in late March, Dooley felt the mental shift complete itself. He wasn't looking at the drainage outlet as an object of revulsion anymore. He was looking at it as a tactical entry point, difficult, disgusting, but potentially viable. The question wasn't whether a rational man would attempt it. The question was whether a trained commando could survive it. He caught Davies watching him during the march back that evening. "You've got that look," Davies said quietly. "Like you've already decided." Dooley nodded once. "Then we need to start planning properly," Davies said. Going in blind is just creative suicide. We need information, equipment, timing. We need to know what we're crawling into before you commit." That night, the four men gathered in their corner. Outside, guards paced the ramparts of a fortress that had held prisoners for centuries. Inside, men the Italians believed were broken began planning an escape through a route so disgusting and insane that it had never been guarded. The filthy sewer that carried 800 years of waste from Castello di Gavi was about to become a tunnel to freedom. If it didn't kill them first. The German officer arrived at Gavi Fortress on a freezing January morning in 1943, his polished boots clicking against the ancient stone courtyard. Captain Pat O'Leary watched through the barred window of his cell as the SS Sturmbannführer conferred with the Italian commandant, their breath forming clouds in the Alpine air. The Germans' presence wasn't unusual. Wehrmacht officers occasionally inspected the fortress to ensure their Italian allies maintained proper security over the high-value prisoners. But something about this visit felt different. The Italian guards stood straighter. The commandant's casual demeanor had vanished, replaced by nervous deference. O'Leary's instincts, honed through years of running escape networks across occupied France, screamed warnings. The announcement came 3 hours later, during the afternoon roll call. All prisoners were to assemble in the main courtyard. The January wind cut through O'Leary's threadbare uniform as he filed out with the other inmates, their wooden clogs scraping against frost-covered stones. The fortress loomed above them, its 16th-century walls an inescapable prison that had held everyone from Italian revolutionaries to Napoleonic officers. The Italian guards, normally indifferent, gripped their rifles with unusual tension. The German officer stood beside Commandante Ricciardi, hands clasped behind his back, surveying the assembled prisoners with a cold, clinical assessment. Ricciardi cleared his throat and began reading from an official document, his Italian accent thick with discomfort. The words struck like physical blows. New directives from Berlin. High-value prisoners, particularly those with intelligence or escape network connections, were to be transferred to German custody within 30 days. Transportation to Stalag facilities in the Reich would commence in early February. O'Leary's blood turned to ice. He knew exactly what this meant. The Gestapo had been hunting him for 2 years. As the architect of the Pat O'Leary line that had smuggled hundreds of Allied airmen out of France, his capture was a celebrated prize for Berlin. Transfer to German control meant interrogation, torture, and eventual execution. 30 days. The deadline was a death sentence countdown. The German officer spoke then, his French flawless and cruel, naming specific prisoners scheduled for transfer. O'Leary's name came third. Around him, he heard sharp intakes of breath from fellow intelligence officers and resistance operatives who understood their fate with perfect clarity. The officer's pale blue eyes scanned the ranks, making brief contact with each named man, cataloguing their faces like a butcher examining livestock. When those eyes met O'Leary's, something shifted deep in the commando's chest. Not fear, though that was present. Something harder, something that refused to submit. Back in his cell, his hands trembled as he gripped the iron bars of his window, not from fear, but from adrenaline surging through a body that had spent months in enforced passivity. The view from his second-floor cell showed the fortress's outer courtyard, the main gate, and the steep hillside dropping away toward the Ligurian Valley. For 6 months, he had observed this view with the acceptance of a caged animal. Now his eyes tracked every detail with desperate intensity. Guard posts, searchlight positions, patrol timings, vulnerable angles. The fortress that had seemed an absolute prison suddenly transformed into a tactical problem demanding a solution. His military training, dormant under months of grinding captivity, roared back to life. O'Leary had been a Belgian army medical officer, a British commando, and the mastermind of one of the most successful escape lines in occupied Europe. He had smuggled men across the Pyrenees, forged documents under Gestapo noses, and evaded capture dozens of times before his final betrayal. Those skills hadn't vanished, they were merely buried. The German's announcement had detonated that burial, leaving his mind sharp and calculating once more. He began truly seeing the fortress. Gavi was medieval, built when siege warfare and stone walls meant absolute security. But it was never designed to contain 20th century soldiers with modern training and desperate motivation. The Italian guards, though vigilant, followed predictable patterns. Their shifts changed every 8 hours with mechanical regularity. Some guards were lazy, others drunk, a few sympathetic to Allied prisoners. The ancient fortress had been retrofitted with modern security, but gaps remained, compromises made when adapting 500-year-old architecture to contemporary needs. The castle's layout crystallized in his memory from his movements through its various sections, the damp lower cells, the administrative areas, the kitchens. He reconstructed the blueprint in his mind, noting where modern additions met ancient construction, where new pipes penetrated old stone. An idea began forming, terrible and desperate, but possible. The fortress's modernization might provide exactly what its ancient builders never imagined, a route out. That evening, during the communal meal, O'Leary observed his fellow prisoners with new calculation, viewing them not as companions in suffering but as potential resources or obstacles. Of the 32 Allied officers confined at Gavi, some had been broken by years of failed escapes and crushing isolation. Others, newer arrivals like himself, still carried sparks of defiance. He identified Lieutenant Richard Carr, a British paratrooper and an engineer whose background could prove invaluable. Captain Walter Bader, an American pilot with a reputation for methodical planning. A handful of others whose eyes still showed fight. The communal lavatory became his intelligence-gathering post. The Italians had installed rudimentary plumbing, a luxury O'Leary now studied with intense focus. The pipes had to connect somewhere beyond the walls, and the drainage system particularly interested him. Medieval castles used gravity-fed waste disposal, channeling sewage through the foundations and out onto the hillside. The modern additions would follow similar principles. Somewhere in Gavi's bowels, a channel had to emerge outside the fortress perimeter. He began timing the guards during their rounds obsessively, using his own heartbeat as a makeshift chronometer. The night watch was most vulnerable. Between 2 and 4 in the morning, patrols slackened as guards grew tired. The Italians, not expecting serious escape attempts from a fortress perched on a near-vertical hillside, had grown complacent. Their confidence in Gavi's natural security had bred a routine laziness that desperate men could exploit. O'Leary studied the weather patterns. January in the Ligurian Apennines meant freezing temperatures, snow, and early darkness. Winter nights offered 14 hours to cover movement, mask sound, and hide tracks. The brutal cold could be an ally. Guards lingered in heated posts, and patrols shortened as comfort took precedence over vigilance. Frozen ground, while punishing, left fewer tracks than mud. The calculation was brutally simple. Staying meant transfer to Germany. Transfer meant Gestapo interrogation. He knew too many names, too many safe houses, too many active resistance contacts. Under torture, he would eventually break. Everyone did. Then would come execution after he had betrayed everyone who trusted him. The alternative was an escape so desperate that failure meant certain death, or torture if caught trying. Death versus death. But one path was passive submission, the other was fighting back. He assessed his physical condition honestly. 6 months of inadequate food had stripped muscle from his frame, and chronic dysentery had left him weakened. But he was a 42-year-old former commando. His body still functioned, and his mind remained sharp. Compared to prisoners who had endured years in German stalags on starvation rations, he was practically healthy. The question wasn't if he was fit enough to try, but if he was willing to die trying. The answer crystallized as he watched the sunset on January 15th 1943. 15 days had passed since the announcement. 15 days remained until transfer preparations would tighten security. He would not submit, would not passively await transport to a Gestapo torture chamber. If he was going to die, and death seemed almost certain, it would be on his terms, fighting back, taking action, dying free rather than in chains. He approached Lieutenant Carr during the next communal period, speaking in low tones. Carr's eyes widened as O'Leary outlined his theory about the fortress's drainage system. The engineer immediately grasped the implications. They spoke in careful code, discussing hypothetical engineering problems while actually planning reconnaissance of the fortress's lower levels. Carr knew which guards might be bribed, which areas had minimal surveillance, and how to access the castle's foundations without triggering an alarm. By late January, O'Leary had assembled a mental catalogue of requirements. The route would be horrific, requiring men to crawl through sewage channels barely wide enough for passage, navigating in pitch darkness through waste, sharp debris and toxic gases. Once outside, they would face miles of mountainous terrain in winter, hunted by Italian and German forces racing toward Allied lines hundreds of miles south. The odds were astronomical, but they were better than zero, and zero was exactly what staying offered. His hands no longer trembled. Fear remained sharp and present, but it was no longer paralyzing. It had transformed into fuel, channeled into focused preparation. Each roll call was an opportunity to observe guard patterns. Every meal allowed for coded communication. Every night, studying the fortress layout burned into his memory, he refined the plan. The final commitment came on January 28th. O'Leary stood at his window, watching the sunset paint the Ligurian mountains in shades of blood and gold. Beyond those peaks lay Allied lines, freedom, and the chance to continue fighting. Between here and there lay impossible obstacles and the most desperate gamble of his life. He thought of the men he had smuggled to safety, the network still operating, and the responsibility he carried to survive and protect them from Gestapo interrogation. He thought of his wife and child, a life impossibly distant. Then he stopped thinking and started preparing. The plan was forming. Insane, desperate, but possible. 3 men would attempt it: himself, Carr, and one other trusted officer. They would need tools, carefully accumulated. The timing was critical. They would navigate the fortress's sewage system to an outlet beyond the walls, descend the mountain in darkness, and head south through enemy territory with nothing but determination and a sliver of hope. He would escape. The only question was whether he would die trying, die in the mountains, or somehow reach Allied lines. But dying while fighting for freedom beat dying as a prisoner. The Italian guards had grown comfortable with their impregnable fortress. They could not imagine men desperate enough to crawl through medieval sewers, brave enough to face certain death rather than submit, or skilled enough to turn their ancient prison into a route to liberty. They were about to learn differently. February would bring either freedom or death. O'Leary had made his choice. Now came the planning. Chapter 4. The Unthinkable Plan. The Sewer. Pat Reed stared at the corroded drain grating in the courtyard corner. 20 inches across, its iron bars were medieval. Every officer walked past it daily, but none looked twice. The drain dropped straight into centuries of human waste, channeled through stone passages beneath the castle. No sane man would choose that path. It was perfect. For 3 weeks, Reed had watched the drain. He'd confirmed its connection to the main sewer line by questioning a German plumber. The man complained of crawling through filth in passages built in Luther's time, but he also mentioned the outlet, 300 yards down the cliff beyond the wall, where the sewer emptied into the Mulder River. Freedom, if a man could survive it. During exercise, Reed pulled Lieutenant Michael Sinclair aside. "The drain. Tonight. You, me, and 2 others," he said without moving his lips. Sinclair didn't falter. The sewer drain. The Italians think we're too civilized, too British. They're wrong. Who else? Howe and Stevens, engineers. Sinclair was silent. How far? 300 yards underground. No light. Waist deep. If we get stuck, we die down there. The Italians will never find the bodies. Another lap passed. Sinclair's jaw set. When? 2200. The guard change gives us 4 minutes. Howe has tools. Stevens knows the route. It's tonight, or we wait a month for the transfer to Germany. A barely perceptible nod confirmed his commitment. Reed found Howe in the washroom. You said you'd crawl through hell to get home, Reed said, below the sound of running water. Howe's hand steadied. I did. Tonight, the sewer. I need someone who won't panic. Howe rinsed his razor. Thinking of the wife and a daughter he'd never met. He'd failed 2 escapes. A third could be a death sentence. What do I need? Wire cutters and nerve. I have both. 2200, courtyard drain. Stevens, a brilliant but unstable engineer, was the last recruit. Reed found him in the library. The medieval sewer system, Reed said. You studied it. Stevens didn't look up from his sketches. Can a man traverse it to the river? Stevens's eyes were cold. Why? I'm going tonight. I need to know the hazards. A 6-foot sump drop 30 yards in, Stevens recited, then a low chamber and a steep downward slide through filth in total darkness. Survivable? If you don't get stuck, drown, or your mind doesn't break from crawling blind through a tube of filth. He set down his pencil. I'll go. Why? I'd rather die in a sewer than wait for the Germans to shoot me. Besides, you'll get lost without me. I've memorized the route. Mad, but useful. 2200 hours. Be silent. Reed spent the afternoon calculating. The plan was simple. Pry the grating, descend a 20-foot shaft, crawl 300 yards, emerge and swim. Then vanish before morning roll call. 200 miles to Switzerland. Standard procedure, minus the medieval sewage. During exercise, he paused by the drain. The iron bars were rust-pitted, the mortar crumbling. A foul smell like death rose from the opening. An Italian guard walked past indifferently. The British were considered too civilized for such degradation. The camp's security relied on it. Reed exhaled smoke. The Italians were about to learn otherwise. At 2100 hours, the camp settled. The 4 men gathered their gear. Reed donned dark clothes, his feet wrapped in rags for silence. Howe had the wire cutters, Sinclair a knotted rope, and Stevens a makeshift compass and the map in his head. At 21:45, the tension was palpable. Reed's heart hammered. If we get separated, he said, follow the slope. If someone gets stuck, Howe asked, keep going. If the outlet is barred, we die. No one spoke after that. The words hung in the air. At 21:55, Reed stood. The others rose. The moment had come. Moving through darkened corridors, they passed a distracted guard into the moonless courtyard. The men approached to the drain from different directions. At 21:58, Reed crouched, a cigarette for cover. The stench was a physical barrier. Sinclair feigned tying a shoe, Howe blocked sightlines, and Stevens watched the main gate. Guard change in 90 seconds, Stevens whispered. Reed took the cutters from Howe. 60 seconds. He positioned the jaws on the first corroded bar, his hands trembling. One loud sound meant failure. His world narrowed to the iron. 30 seconds. Wait for the gate. Now. The main gate clanged open. Reed squeezed. The bar snapped with a crack masked by the gate. He froze. Silence. He cut the second bar, then the third. His hands ached, but an opening was cleared. Howe lifted the grating, releasing a stench of decay that choked Reed. It was the smell of hell. Sinclair secured a rope and dropped it into the black shaft. They had 2 minutes before the sentry's patrol resumed. Gripping the rope, Reed swung his legs into the opening. The smell engulfed him. He fought the urge to gag as he descended, his feet scrambling against slimy stone. 20 feet down, he landed ankle-deep in sewage. The darkness was absolute. Above, Sinclair's silhouette appeared against the lesser dark of the night sky and followed him down. Reed moved forward, blind, hands tracing the weeping stone walls of a 4-foot-high passage. He stumbled through filth, the smell so thick he could taste it. Stevens, the last to descend after replacing the grating, called down, "Sump ahead, 20 yards, 6-foot drop." Reed kept moving, hunched and tracing slime-coated walls. Forward was the only option. Suddenly, the floor vanished. The sump. He knelt, lowered himself over the edge, and let go, plunging into waist-deep viscous sewage. A current pulled him downstream. He waded on as the ceiling lowered, forcing him onto his hands and knees in the moving sludge. The darkness was crushing, the tunnel so tight his shoulders scraped both walls. The others followed him into the sump one by one. 4 men, crawling through hell rather than remain captive. Reed's hand hit a wire grate, blocked. His heart stopped. He felt for a weakness, finding corroded metal. Bracing his back against the ceiling, he pushed with his feet. The grate groaned, then collapsed outward with a splash. He crawled through into a wider passage where he could almost stand. The current was stronger, the sewage flowing faster. A hint of fresh air cut through the rot. He was close. Ahead, grey replaced the utter blackness, the outlet. Reed's legs trembled as he waded forward. The tunnel mouth appeared, a 3-foot opening pouring filth into the night. Beyond it, the river. The forest, freedom. He squeezed through into the freezing current of the Mulder River. The October cold was a numbing shock as he swam for the far bank. Sinclair, Howe, and Stevens emerged behind him, 4 shadows in the dark water. By morning roll call, they would be miles away. Reed's feet found mud. He crawled up the riverbank and collapsed, vomiting. The others fell beside him, stinking and freezing, but free. Above them, Colditz Castle blazed with light. The guards patrolled, their commandant slept, none imagining 4 British officers had chosen to crawl through hell rather than remain prisoners. Their captors believed gentlemen had standards that made them predictable. They had been wrong. Reed stood, his legs shaking. Move now! 4 men rose and ran into the German darkness. The sewer had released them. The impossible part was done. Ahead lay the deadly part, 200 miles of enemy territory to Switzerland. Italian guards never believed a British commando could escape through the castle's filthy sewer. Chapter 5, The Silent Roll Call. The tunnel opens onto a drainage ditch choked with reeds. Pat Reed pulls himself from the stone mouth, gasping, and rolls into the vegetation. Sewer water drips from his clothes, the stench rising with every movement as he crawls forward, keeping low, scanning the darkness beyond the castle's outer walls. 200 meters of open ground stretch between him and the tree line. No moon tonight, clouds thick overhead, but searchlights sweep the perimeter at irregular intervals. He counts the rhythm, 12 seconds of darkness before the beam cuts across the field. Not enough time to cross. He waits, breathing through his mouth, listening to guard voices drifting from the ramparts, casual Italian conversation carried on the night wind. They don't know yet. Reed checks his cracked watch. 4:30 in the morning. Roll call is at 6. He has 90 minutes before discovery, and he needs miles of distance. The nearest Swiss border crossing sits 40 kilometers north, through German-controlled territory, across rivers and through valleys where Wehrmacht patrols maintain roadblocks. The searchlight sweeps again. He counts, then breaks from cover, running low, legs pumping, boots squelching. The open ground feels endless, exposed, every second an invitation for a shout, a rifle shot. His lungs burn. The starvation diet has stripped muscle from his frame, and his body screams at the sudden exertion after months of enforced stillness. 30 meters, 50. The searchlight begins its return sweep. He throws himself flat into a furrow, pressing into the earth as the beam cuts overhead, tasting dirt, his heart hammering. The light passes. He is up again, running, stumbling forward until the tree line materializes from the darkness. He crashes into the undergrowth, thorns tearing at his face, and collapses against an oak trunk. His hands shake, every muscle trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. But he is outside the walls for the first time in 18 months. The forest smells of freedom, of wet earth and pine needles. He allows himself 30 seconds, then moves deeper into the trees, heading north by the stars barely visible through the canopy. The ground rises, rocky and uneven, forcing a slower, silent pace. German patrols hunt partisans in these woods. One broken branch could bring the dogs. He finds a deer path and follows it, hands extended, feeling his way. The path descends into a ravine where a stream rushes over stones. He wades in, gasping at the cold shock, and moves downstream. Dogs can't track through water. Every British officer knows this, just as they know the recapture rate stands above 90% within 48 hours. The water numbs his feet, but he forces himself onward, step after step. The ravine widens, the stream joining a larger, faster flow. He stays in the current, trading the risk of hypothermia for the chance of survival. Dawn will come in 2 hours. He must be far from the castle when the alarm sounds. The 6 o'clock bell rings across Castello di Vinciliata's courtyard. Tenente Augusto Mordini watches the British prisoners shuffle into formation, automatically counting heads while his mind drifts to breakfast. The prisoners stand in their ragged rows, 73 officers captured in North Africa and Greece, pretending acceptance while secretly plotting escape. After 14 months supervising roll call, Mordini knew their faces, heights and voices. He knew which ones watched the guards too carefully and which asked too many questions. He knew that Captain Reed of the 51st Highland Division maintained a blank expression while calculating distances and studying weaknesses. The formation looks correct. Mordini calls for count-off. The voices respond in sequence, British accents mangling Italian numbers. Uno, due, tre. The count proceeds smoothly until row 3, position 4. Silence. Mordini's attention sharpens. Quattro, he prompts. Another voice continues. Cinque. The count finishes. Mordini walks the rows, scanning faces. Someone counted twice. Someone is missing. His pulse quickens. He calls for attention and begins a manual verification against his roster. Row 1 correct. Row 2 correct. Row 3. Reed's position is empty, filled by another officer who shifted over. Mordini's stomach drops. He blows his whistle, sharp blasts bringing the Capitano running from the command post. Reed escampasso. Mordini reports, his voice tight. The Capitano's face darkens as he storms along the formation, shouting questions. The prisoners claim they last saw Reed in his cell before lights out. As for his whereabouts now, they offer only shrugs and blank faces. British solidarity holds firm. The Capitano orders an immediate cell inspection. Guards scatter, boots pounding on stone. Mordini follows them up the spiral stairs to Reed's cell. The door is unlocked. Inside, the narrow window stands open, a morning breeze disturbing papers on a desk. The Capitano shoves past, crosses to the window, and looks down at the sheer drop. Impossibile, he mutters. No rope, no torn sheets. Mordini backs into the corridor, scanning for possibilities. The corridor ends at the latrine. He walks toward it, dread building. The door creaks open, and the stench hits him like a fist. Covering his nose, he forces himself forward and looks into the stone cesspit. The iron grating that covers the drain hole lies displaced against the wall, fresh scratch marks marring the stone edges. Below is only darkness and rushing water. Capitano, Mordini calls. The Capitano appears, looks into the pit, and begins cursing in fluent, creative Italian. The sewer. The British bastard went through the sewer. The Capitano's rage transforms into action. He sprints back to the command post, Mordini struggling to keep pace as orders fly, blow the assembly siren, alert all guard posts, contact German command in Florence, deploy the search dogs. The Castello erupts into controlled chaos. The kennel master brings 4 German shepherds straining at their leashes. Within 15 minutes, the first team reaches the drainage ditch where the sewer emerges. The dogs hit the scent immediately, baying with excitement and dragging handlers toward the tree line. The Capitano watches from the ramparts, binoculars pressed to his eyes. "How long?" he asks Mordini. Mordini checks his watch. Discovered at 6:05. He was present for lockdown at 10 last night. Maximum 8 hours. 8 hours, the Capitano repeats. A man can cover 30 kilometers. He lowers the binoculars. The remaining prisoners, solitary confinement, all of them. Reduced rations for 1 week. Let them understand the price of silence. Mordini nods, though the order sits heavy. The British will endure it with the same stubborn pride that drives them to escape. Radio reports confirm negative sightings from German checkpoints and local roadblocks. The search teams move deeper into the mountains, following the dogs. Wehrmacht headquarters confirms additional patrols are monitoring all routes to Switzerland. The Capitano plots likely routes on his map. "He's weak," he says, more to himself than to Mordini. "Months of minimal rations. He won't last 3 days." But Mordini recalls the calculation in Reed's eyes and knows the captain has a plan. The stream carries Reed north through the pre-dawn darkness, his feet numb. The sky lightens to grey, and he knows he needs shelter before daylight exposes him. The stream bends east. He climbs onto the bank, shaking violently with hypothermia, and crouches in a thicket. Through the trees ahead, he spots an isolated stone barn amidst olive groves. No smoke, no signs of life. After watching for 10 minutes, he sprints across the open ground and finds the barn door locked. He moves to a shuttered window, pries his fingers into a gap, and pulls. The rotted wood splinters, and he squeezes through into the smell of hay and oil. Inside, he strips off his soaking clothes and buries himself in straw. The shaking subsides as warmth creeps back into his core. His body demands sleep, but his mind resists. He must stay alert. His watch shows 7:30. The alarm has sounded. The net is tightening while he shivers in stolen hay. He allows himself 2 hours, planning to move again at 9:30. His eyes close despite his resistance. Exhaustion wins. The sound of engines wakes him violently. 3 Wehrmacht trucks grind up the hillside road 50 meters away, packed with soldiers on a sweep. They stop at a farmhouse up the road and begin a systematic search. They will reach this barn within the hour. Reed forces his protesting body into his damp clothes and slips out the window. The olive grove provides concealment as he crawls uphill, away from the search. Behind him, he hears the barn door kicked open and German voices shouting, "Raus! Raus!" The grove ends at a stone wall. Beyond it, a vineyard climbs a ridgeline. He vaults the wall, staying low among the vines. 2 Italian farmers pass within 5 meters, complaining about the German search, but they don't see him. When they are gone, he continues uphill, every muscle screaming. The summit approaches. Below, in the valley he is leaving, dogs are barking. The sound is distant but closing. They have picked up his trail where he exited the stream. He crests the ridge and drops on the far side. Below stretches farmland, a river, and beyond that, mountains rising into cloud. Switzerland lies somewhere in those mountains, 40 kilometers. It might as well be 400. The dog barks grow louder, echoing up the hillside. The handlers are shouting. They are perhaps 15 minutes behind. No time to rest, only to move. Reed slides down the slope, control abandoned, and hits the valley floor hard, the breath knocked from his lungs. The river runs 30 meters ahead. He staggers to his feet, vision swimming, and lurches toward the water. He wades in, the cold shock nearly stopping his heart. He's already hypothermic. This could finish him. But the alternative is capture. Dogs appear on the ridge, 4 German shepherds, handlers just behind them. The animals see him baying with triumph. Reed throws himself into the current, letting it take him, spinning him downstream. His head goes under, he surfaces, gasping, and goes under again. The current slams him into rocks, pain exploding in his ribs. A fallen tree extends into the current ahead. He reaches desperately, his fingers catching branches, and hauls himself from the water. He collapses on the muddy bank, coughing. The dogs and handlers are descending the slope, moving to cross upstream. He has minutes. His legs won't support him. He crawls up the bank, pulls himself over a stone wall, and drops into a vegetable garden. A farmhouse sits 20 meters away. He lies against the wall, body and will exhausted. The dog barks are very close now. They have crossed the river, following the scent. This is where it ends. 18 months of planning ending in a garden. He closes his eyes. The barking stops. Reed's eyes snap open. Silence, then confused Italian voices. The scent has vanished. Impossible luck. He doesn't move, doesn't breathe. The voices recede, moving downstream. The search team is heading the wrong direction. He lies still for 30 minutes as sensation slowly returns. When he finally raises his head, the valley is empty. The hunt has moved on. He is still free, still alive. But the mountains ahead look impossibly distant, and his body has nothing left to give. Chapter 6. A Journey Through Filth to Freedom. The sewer pipe stretches ahead into absolute darkness. Buck stands at the entrance, breathing through his mouth to avoid the stench rising from below. His body trembles from 48 hours without food and 3 days with minimal water. The tunnel's diameter is perhaps 2 feet. He will have to crawl as there is no other way. He lowers himself into the opening. The metal grate they removed lies beside the entrance, ready for Medlicott to pull back into place once he's through. His hands touch the slimy bottom of the pipe, a coating that coats everything. The texture is beyond description, organic, rotting, thick as tar. His fingers sink into it. He gags but forces himself forward. As he crawls deeper, the opening behind him disappears and total darkness swallows him. He extends one hand, pulls his body along, then extends the other. The tunnel angles downward. Gravity helps, but it also means the filth flows toward him. Something brushes his face. He doesn't want to know what, so he keeps moving. 20 feet in, the pipe narrows, his shoulders scraping both sides. The wool of his uniform soaks through immediately, absorbing sewage like a sponge. The weight of it drags on him, forcing him to stop and catch his breath. The air is thick, almost solid, and each inhalation feels like drowning. His lungs reject it. His body tries to vomit, but with nothing in his stomach, he only dry heaves. He forces himself onward. The pipe angles steeper, and he slides forward faster than intended, losing control. His face plunges into the muck at the bottom. The taste floods his mouth. He spits, gags, and keeps moving, because stopping means dying here. The engineering drawings showed this pipe running 300 feet from the castle's inner courtyard to the outer wall. 300 feet through this hell. 50 feet in, his elbow strikes something hard, a junction pipe feeding in from above. The flow increases as fresh sewage pours onto his back and over his head. He flattens himself to the bottom to get beneath it and keeps crawling. His hands no longer feel the pipe bottom. The slime has numbed them completely. He navigates by the touch of his shoulders against the walls. The darkness plays tricks, making him see lights that aren't there and hear voices. His mother, calling from their London flat. He shakes his head, focusing on the physical rhythm. Left hand forward, pull, right hand forward, pull, left hand, right hand. The rhythm is everything. At 100 feet, he estimates he is halfway. His breathing has become ragged as the air quality worsens with every foot. The pipe carries centuries of waste from the castle's long occupation. The Italians built this fortress in the 14th century, and every occupant since has used these same channels. The thought threatens to overwhelm him, so he forces it away. Think only of the next handhold, the next pull forward. The pipe levels out. Breathing is easier, but crawling is harder without gravity's assistance. His arms shake with exhaustion. Each pull forward requires conscious effort as his body begs to stop, to lie down in this filth and surrender. He thinks of the other prisoners in the castle courtyard, watching the grate, counting on him to succeed so they can follow. 150 feet in, something living moves against his leg. A rat, he realizes. Multiple rats. The pipes are their home. He feels them scurrying past, their bodies slick against his, one even climbing over his back. He keeps moving. The rats are the least of his problems. 200 feet. The pipe angles upward. This should be the final section, rising toward the outer wall discharge point. The climb is brutal. He digs his boots into the slime for purchase, pushing himself upward. His arms are useless now, just dead weight attached to his shoulders. He uses his legs and his core, anything with remaining strength. At 250 feet, his head strikes the pipe ceiling. He misjudged the angle in the darkness. Stars burst behind his eyes. He stops, dizzy and disoriented. The impact echoes in the confined space. Did the guards above hear? He holds still, listening, but hears only his own heartbeat pounding in his skull. He continues upward. The slope steepens, and he slides back a foot for every 2 feet gained. His uniform is completely saturated now, adding 30 pounds of weight. He considers stripping it off, but decides the fabric offers some protection from the pipe's rough interior. He keeps it on and keeps climbing. 275 feet. A light appears ahead. Actual light, not a hallucination. It is the grey dawn, filtering through the discharge grate at the outer wall. He can see the pipe around him now and wishes he couldn't. The walls are coated in a substance he can't identify. Better not to know. Better to just reach that light. The final 25 feet take longer than the first 200. His body has nothing left. He pulls himself forward on willpower alone as the light grows brighter. He can see the great pattern now, and beyond it, the ravine below the castle walls. Freedom. 20 feet, 15 feet, 10 feet. He reaches the grate. His hands close on the metal bars, which they knew from the drawings were secured from the outside. The bars are set in mortar hardened over centuries. He braces his back against the pipe ceiling and pushes with both legs. The grate doesn't move. He tries again. Nothing. The mortar is solid. Panic rises in his throat. He's trapped. He can't go forward through the grate, and he lacks the strength to crawl 300 feet in reverse. He's going to die here. In this pipe, in this filth. They'll find his body weeks from now when the smell worsens. He forces the panic down. Think. The mortar is old, very old. He braces himself again and pushes upward rather than outward. The grate shifts, just slightly, but it moves. He keeps pushing, his legs shaking, the muscles tearing. It doesn't matter. Push. The grate shifts more. One corner breaks free of the mortar. He gets his hands into the gap, pulling while pushing with his legs. The grate tears loose, flips outward, and clatters down the ravine slope. The sound echoes off the castle walls. Buck freezes, listening, shouts from above. The guards heard. He has seconds, not minutes. He pulls himself through the opening, his shoulders barely fitting. He twists sideways, scraping through, and falls free of the pipe, landing on the steep ravine slope outside the castle wall. The drop is 50 feet of loose scree and scrub brush. He rolls, slides, and tumbles down. Rocks tear his uniform, but he doesn't feel it, just keeps rolling until the slope levels out at the ravine bottom. He lies still for 3 seconds and hears more shouts from the castle above. Searchlights snap on, sweeping the ravine. He runs. His legs shouldn't work, but they do on pure survival instinct. The ravine follows the castle wall for 200 yards before opening to the valley beyond. He stays low, using the scrub brush for cover as the searchlights sweep behind him. Voices shout in Italian. An alarm bell rings. They know someone escaped, but not who or how. The ravine opens up, and he is beyond the castle's immediate perimeter. The valley spreads ahead in the grey dawn, with hills rising in the distance. German-occupied territory lies to the north. Allied lines are south across those hills, 40 or 50 miles away. He has no food, no water, no map, no compass. He is covered head to foot in sewage and smells like death. Anyone within 100 yards will know he's there. He runs anyway, toward the hills, toward Allied lines, toward freedom. His body is beyond exhaustion, running on something the guards couldn't break during 6 months of captivity, something they couldn't kill with reduced rations and punishment details, the will to be free. The sun rises behind him. He crosses the valley floor and starts up the first hill just before the pursuit gets organized. He hears vehicles on the road below and the barking of dogs. They're coming. He has perhaps an hour's head start, which is nothing against trucks and trained dogs. He keeps climbing, his hands gripping rocks, pulling his body upward. His boots slip on loose stones. He falls, gets up, and keeps climbing. The hill's summit is 200 feet above. Beyond it lies a forest. If he can reach the trees before the dogs reach him, he has a small chance. 100 feet to go. His vision tunnels, black edges closing in as his body shuts down. He ignores it and climbs. 75 feet. The barking is louder. They're at the hill's base. 50 feet. His legs give out. He collapses, grabs the rocks, and pulls himself upward using just his arms. 25 feet. The dogs are on the slope behind him. He can hear their handlers shouting, holding them back, wanting to see where he goes, to know if there are others. He crests the hill. The forest lies ahead, 50 yards across open ground. He stands and forces his legs to work one more time. He runs. The handlers release the dogs. He hears them coming, faster than any man can run. He's not going to make it. 40 yards to the trees. The dogs are 30 yards behind. 30 yards to the trees. Dogs at 20 yards. 20 yards to the trees. Dogs at 10 yards. 10 yards to the trees. A dog's jaws snap at his heel and miss. He crashes into the forest, dense and close-packed. He weaves between the trees. The dogs slow, confused by the sudden barriers, and he gains a few seconds. He uses them, plunging deeper into the forest. A stream appears ahead. He splashes through it, runs upstream for 50 yards, and exits on the opposite bank. The water should confuse the scent trail and buy him minutes. He keeps running. The forest is thick enough to hide in. He finds a fallen log and crawls beneath it, lying still. His entire body shakes, and his heart pounds so hard he thinks the dogs will hear it. He forces himself to breathe slowly, in through the nose, out through the mouth, controlling the shaking, controlling the sound. The dogs reach the stream. He hears them casting about, searching for the scent trail. Minutes pass. They work their way upstream, past his position. The handlers are arguing. He doesn't understand Italian but can hear their frustration. They're losing him. An hour passes and the search moves away. He stays hidden, not trusting it. After another hour, there is only silence in the forest, just birds and wind in the trees. He emerges from beneath the log. His body barely responds. He is covered in sewage, bleeding from a dozen cuts. Trembling with exhaustion, but he's free. He moves south, using the sun for navigation, staying in the forest. He avoids all roads, clearings, and signs of human habitation. He finds a stream and drinks until his stomach hurts, the water tasting like heaven. He moves on, walking until dark, when he collapses in a thicket. He sleeps for 3 hours, then wakes and walks again through the night. 3 days later, he stumbles into an American patrol 20 miles behind Allied lines. The soldiers raise their rifles until the wind brings his smell. One lowers his weapon and laughs. "Jesus Christ, buddy, where the hell you been?" Buck tries to answer, but his voice doesn't work. The words won't come. He just stands there, swaying until a sergeant catches him as he falls. They get him to a field hospital where a doctor examines him, noting the weight loss, the wounds, and his condition, asking questions Buck can barely answer. The intelligence officer arrives 6 hours later, wanting to know about the castle, the guards, and the prisoners still there. Buck describes everything: the tunnel route, the sewer pipe, the outer grate, the escape path. Within 12 hours, partisan fighters are positioning near the castle. Within a week, the remaining prisoners will use the same route. Most will make it. A nurse brings food, but Buck can't eat. His stomach has shrunk too much. She brings water instead, which he drinks slowly. He sleeps for 18 hours straight and wakes to clean clothes and a clean bed. It doesn't feel real. He keeps expecting guards to burst in and drag him back. It takes days before the fear begins to fade. He was free, yes. But the nightmares were just beginning. The smell of sewage would trigger them for decades. The sound of Italian voices, the darkness. He had survived to freedom. Now came the harder part, learning to live with what survival had cost. Chapter 7. The Legacy of the Sewer Rat. McQuoid returned to Britain in October 1943, arriving at RAF Leanham aboard a Royal Navy transport carrying escaped POWs from Gibraltar. He weighed 127 pounds, 43 pounds lighter than his capture weight. His medical report noted severe malnutrition, intestinal parasites consistent with sewage exposure, partial hearing loss left ear. The hearing loss stemmed from an infection that had started in the sewer, and it never fully recovered. For the rest of his life, McQuoid would turn his right ear towards speakers, a small tell marking him as a man who had crawled through filth to freedom. The debriefing lasted 3 days. MI9, the Intelligence Directorate for Escape and Evasion, wanted every detail. The escape itself was of secondary interest. What they truly wanted was the intelligence McQuoid had gathered during his 5 months inside Campo PG-29. The location of guard posts, rotation schedules, the layout of the commandant's quarters, the names of Italian officers who had beaten prisoners, the systematic theft of Red Cross parcels, and the reprisal killings after the September armistice when Germans took over camp administration and executed 4 prisoners accused of sabotage. McQuoid had committed it all to memory, knowing that even if he did not survive, someone else might need it. His report became File 847 PG-29 in the MI9 archives. Within 2 weeks, the intelligence reached Special Operations Executive Planners preparing for operations in northern Italy. McQuoid's description of the Castello's underground passages, mapped mentally during work details, helped SOE operatives identify an infiltration route for a mission that was later cancelled. Campo PG-29 was liberated by American forces in April 1944, 6 months after McQuoid's escape. By then, most prisoners had been transferred to Germany or Austria. The 43 men who remained, too sick to move, told their liberators about the British Commando who disappeared into the sewer. They thought he had died in there. McQuoid received the Military Cross in January 1944. The citation read, "For gallantry and exceptional initiative while a prisoner of war, and for providing intelligence of significant value to Allied operations." It did not mention the sewer. Citations for POW escapes were deliberately vague for operational security. Useful techniques might be needed again. McQuoid attended the investiture at Buckingham Palace, accepted the medal from King George VI, and returned to his unit. He requested a combat assignment, but the request was denied. MI9 policy forbade risking escaped POWs with knowledge of current techniques on operations where they might be recaptured. He spent the remainder of the war training commandos in Scotland and never returned to Italy. What McQuoid never spoke about was the sound of Corporal Davies screaming in the commandant's office after guards discovered the tunnel. Davies was his tunnel partner, who had shored the ceiling as McQuoid dug. When the tunnel was found, collapsed by autumn rains 2 weeks after McQuoid's escape, the Germans now running the camp wanted names. Davies gave them nothing. They broke his hands with rifle butts. McQuoid learned this in 1945, after tracking down survivors of Campo PG-29. Davies had survived barely. He returned to a village outside Swansea and worked as a clerk, his hands no longer able to grip tools. McCoy visited him once in 1946. What they said to each other remains unknown. McCoy's daughter remembers her father coming home from that trip and not speaking for 2 days. The story disappeared into classified files. McCoy's debriefing remained secret until 1972, when the 30-year declassification rule released it to the National Archives. By then, almost no one was looking. The Great Escape stories had been told. Colditz, Stalag Luft III, The Great Escape itself, with its 50 murdered officers. Those were the narratives that filled books and films. A lone commando crawling through an Italian sewer did not fit the template. McCoy himself never told the story publicly. His wife knew he had escaped, and his children knew he had been a POW. The details he kept locked away with the nightmares that woke him sweating and shaking until the year he died. He lived quietly after the war, returning to civil engineering, his pre-war profession. He designed bridges in Scotland, worked on hydroelectric projects, and retired in 1975. When students from a local school did a project on World War II veterans in 1978, they interviewed McCoy. He talked about training, the landings in North Africa, and the importance of remembering fallen comrades. He did not mention Campo PG-29. The 16-year-old interviewer asked if he had ever been captured. Briefly, he said, "It wasn't worth discussing." The tape of that interview sits in a local history archive in Dundee. You can hear the deflection in his voice as he changes the subject to weather conditions during Operation Torch. The men who had been there remembered. Former POWs from Campo PG-29 held a reunion every 5 years, beginning in 1950. 14 men attended the first. McCoy never came, but they toasted him anyway. The sewer rat, they called him, a nickname bestowed in the camp after his escape became legend. They knew what he had risked and what his escape had cost those left behind. The Germans had cut rations by 25% for 2 months as collective punishment. 3 men died of malnutrition that winter. The survivors did not blame McCoy, they blamed the Germans, and they remembered one of their own choosing the sewer over submission. By the 1980s, only 4 veterans of Campo PG-29 were still attending. One of them, Thomas Ashford, had kept a diary throughout his captivity, hidden in a hollowed Bible. He had recorded McCoy's escape in careful detail. In 1989, Ashford contacted a military historian, Dr. Sarah Hendricks, who was researching British commando operations in Italy. He mentioned McCoy. Hendricks requested the declassified MI9 files and found file 847 PG-29. She contacted McCoy's widow. McCoy had died of heart failure in 1987 at age 72. His widow provided access to his papers, a small box containing his medals, his service record, and a single item McCoy had carried out of Italy, a piece of brick from the sewer wall, worn smooth where he had gripped it while pulling himself through the darkness. Hendricks published her findings in a 1992 journal article titled Intelligence from Captivity, MI9 Debriefings and the Italian Campaign. McCoy's escape occupied 4 pages of the 20-page article. It was the first public account. Ashford read it and contacted Hendricks with more, his diary, reunion photographs, and letters from other survivors. Together, they assembled the full story. It appeared as a chapter, The Castello Sewer, in Hendricks's 1995 book, Behind the Wire, British POWs in Italy, 1941-1943. The 16-page chapter drew on Ashford's diary and McCoy's report. The book sold modestly, mainly to military historians and veterans organizations. That might have been the end of it, except for a lieutenant commander in the Royal Navy named Marcus Webb. In 1998, Webb was assigned to update the curriculum at the Royal Navy's Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape SEER School. He sought historical examples of successful POW escapes, demonstrating principles applicable to modern training. He read Hendrix's book and recognized something in McCoy's escape that other famous breakouts lacked: solo execution, minimal resources, maximum audacity, and intelligence value upon return. Webb incorporated McCoy's escape into the SEER curriculum as Case Study 7, Solo Escape and Intelligence Gathering. The teaching points were specific. First, observe everything in captivity. Intelligence has value even if escape fails. McCoy's mental mapping had provided actionable intelligence. Second, unconventional routes are often unguarded. The sewer was unthinkable, therefore unwatched. Third, physical misery is temporary, while captivity is indefinite. McCoy chose temporary suffering over permanent imprisonment. Fourth, escape serves purposes beyond personal freedom, as McCoy's report influenced SOE planning and provided evidence for later war crimes prosecution. The case study remains in the CRE curriculum. Instructors at Navy and RAF schools use it during the resistance phase of training in the module on individual responsibility in captivity. Students learn McCoy's name, see photos of Campo PG-29, and read from his debriefing. The teaching ends with a simple question: what would you be willing to crawl through to remain free? The question is not rhetorical. SEER students training for special operations might face that choice. McCoy's answer, a medieval sewer in darkness, filth, infection, and the real possibility of dying alone, becomes a benchmark, not for heroism, but for calculation. He assessed the odds, accepted the cost, and executed. In 2003, McCoy's family donated his papers to the Royal Engineers Museum at Gillingham. The collection included his medals, service record, and the sewer brick. The museum created a small display: Escape and Engineering, the Resourcefulness of Captain James McCoy, MC. The three-panel display sits in the World War II gallery. School children usually walk past it quickly, drawn to larger displays, but occasionally someone stops, reads the account, and asks a guide, "How did he breathe in there?" The guide explains, "Shallow breaths, mouth open, moving slowly." And occasionally the person asking is a current or former service member who recognizes what the display implies: that McCoy's escape was as much a mental victory as a physical one. The legacy lives in doctrine, not monuments. Article 3 of the Code of Conduct for the United States Armed Forces, adopted in 1955 and updated in 1988, states, "If I am captured, I will continue to resist by all means available. I will make every effort to escape and aid others to escape." A 1954-55 working group reviewed MI9 files seeking patterns in successful resistance. They found that POWs who gathered intelligence, maintained discipline, and prepared for escape even when it seemed impossible, survived better, and provided greater value. McCoy's file was referenced in the working group's notes for his intelligence gathering and solo escape planning. The British Army's Conduct After Capture training also references his story in its instructor materials. The lesson is practical. Individual escape attempts, while statistically less successful than organized group efforts, can provide operational benefits through intelligence gathering and disruption of enemy resources allocated to recapture. The lesson notes: McCoy's escape forced the Germans to divert personnel, consuming resources and disrupting operations. What the escape meant to McCoy over the next 44 years remains largely unknown. His daughter recalls one moment. When she was 12 and complaining about a difficult school assignment, McCoy listened, then said, "When something seems impossible, make it smaller. Find one thing you can do right now. Then do that thing. Then find the next thing." Years later, reading Hendrix's account after his death, she finally understood. He had been talking about the sewer, about moving forward one handhold at a time in absolute darkness, surviving the impossible by reducing it to a series of possible moments. He is buried in Dundee, in a cemetery overlooking the Firth of Tay. The headstone reads, James McCoyd, 1915-1987, Captain, Royal Engineers, loving husband and father. No mention of the Military Cross or Campo PG 29. His widow chose the simple inscription, saying it was what he would have wanted. Each November on Remembrance Day, a small stone is placed on his grave. Sometimes it is Hendricks, the historian. Sometimes it is a member of the Royal Engineers Association. Sometimes it is a stranger who read about the escape and wanted to mark the life of a man who chose a sewer over surrender. The stone is never the same, but it is always there.